One of the most controversial topics in this moment is whether or not you should negotiate with a bully or someone who's a narcissist. On the one hand, it can feel like doing so is rewarding their absolutely atrocious behavior. On the other side, we sometimes feel trapped and stuck and we just don't know what to do. So in this video, I'm going to offer you tips on how to decide whether to engage in a negotiation. And if you stick to the end, I'm going to offer you some advice on how to avoid being in a similar situation with the same exact bully a second time. So first, before you decide whether you negotiate with a bully, you need to consider your alternatives. So in negotiation, we have this concept, something called one's BATNA. So a BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated resolution, or your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So before I decide whether or not I'm going to negotiate with the bully, I need to think about, if I don't negotiate with them, what are the things that I can do that do not require an agreement with that bully? And of that list of things, I want to identify which is the best of my alternatives. And so if I'm deciding to negotiate with a bully, I need to think about, do I have some alternatives, a BATNA, that is better than anything this person can offer me? What that really means, of course, is I need to understand what my interests are. So question number one, right, is if negotiating with the bully is important because my BATNA is very bad, then I might need to negotiate with them, as uncomfortable and terrible as that is. On the other hand, if my BATNA, if my away from the table alternative is strong, I may decide that I simply don't want to negotiate with the bully. Now, let's say I made the decision that for whatever set of reasons, I need to engage this negotiation. Oftentimes, I can actually limit the grounds of the engagement. So I think there's a lot of examples where we see this happening. Consider the agreement this past summer between Russia and Ukraine around allowing exporting of wheat from the Ukraine. It turns out that in considering the alternatives of both countries and, frankly, of global hunger, that there was a decision made to engage this negotiation. But that negotiation has not extended beyond that to other important issues. Or consider also the decision of the United States to negotiate with the Russians around the release of the women's NBA player Brittany Griner. It turns out that in a whole host of situations, given the war in Ukraine, given the bully behavior of Vladimir Putin, the United States is not negotiating with Russia. But in this small set of issue around this hostage, the United States is engaged in negotiations. So they're limiting the grounds or limiting the scope of engagement. Third, if you're trying to decide whether to negotiate, identify a friend or an ally or a colleague who can coach you and help you prepare and serve as kind of a reality checker for you both during and after the negotiation. So my experience is that it's easy to fall into some kind of a pattern when you're negotiating with a bully. So typically we discover they're a bully because they've bullied us before, and then we get into this pattern where we allow ourselves to be bullied. But by working with some external party who can really help you understand where it is okay to stand your ground, who can help you call out the behavior when it's happening, you can be more fully engaged and fully prepared for that negotiation. Lastly, let's imagine that you've decided that your BATNA is such that you have to negotiate with that narcissist or with that bully. It's really important that you do the work to try to avoid finding yourself in that situation the next time you negotiate. So what that means typically is that you engage the uncomfortable negotiation, you come to some kind of agreement, and then from that moment forward, you spend all of your time and energy trying to improve your BATNA, to change your power situation the next time you find yourself in a similar situation. So let me share with you a story of how one of my clients was able to fundamentally change the game so that they would not be in the same situation they were in the first round of negotiations. So this client was selling a product to a very powerful player in the field. This player in the field had an incredible brand. They were known to throw their prestige around all the time. And so in this negotiation, as per usual, the brand leader basically did some version of a take it or leave it. Like, this is the deal. If you want to work with us, you'll say yes. Otherwise, best of luck. And so in round one, my client, regrettably, but felt like when they did a BATNA analysis, they had no choice, and they said yes. But then over the 2 years of the contract, they used the affiliation with the brand leader to acquire for themselves a huge slate of clients. In fact, by the time the second negotiations were coming up, the alternative, the BATNA of my client, was extremely strong. They no longer needed the brand leader. In fact, it would be sufficient for them to simply say, in their list of past clients, they had worked for brand leader. And so when the other side decided to use the same kind of hard bargaining, it was much easier to say no. But what had happened during this period was that the brand leader had become extremely reliant on the very good customer service, on the responsiveness to all sorts of concerns. And at that point, the cost for the brand leader to abandon my client was much higher. So structurally, what had happened is two things. One, my client had improved their BATNA enormously. But secondly, they had managed to worsen the perception of the other side's BATNA. So where the other side felt like time one, they had a huge amount of power, time two, they were actually quite reliant. So the four things you want to be thinking about when you think about whether or not you should deal with a bully. First, consider your alternatives. If you have a BATNA that's better than negotiating with the bully, don't negotiate. But otherwise, you may have to negotiate. Second, if you do decide you're going to negotiate, limit the grounds of engagement. In other words, make it clear that for the exigent set of circumstances, you're engaging the other side on these limited terms. Three, because there might be a pattern where you get steamrolled, work with a friend, an ally, a colleague, or a coach to help you prepare and to serve as a reality checker during your negotiation. And fourth, do what you can to avoid being in the same situation next time. Typically, that means two things: working hard to improve your BATNA and doing what you can to either change the other side's BATNA or change their perception of their BATNA. So if you want to keep on learning how to improve in your negotiations and mediations, watch this next video, What Happens If You Don't Agree in Mediation? And please be sure to subscribe to this channel, hit like, and ring the bell. Okay, you want to know what happens if you don't agree in a mediation? Keep watching.